Hey, everybody. In this week's episode, we're going to be getting into order and chaos and why those are the cosmos at play. Both of these are really essential forces that need to be understood, embraced, and worked with in order to really bring balance and harmony into our life. So that's what we're going to be getting into next. So stay tuned for that.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Wizard Factory video podcast, where you subscribe for weekly videos exploring deeper understanding of the universe and ourselves. My name is Logan Hart.
And I'm Brian Easterday.
If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Catch us every week for new episodes, and like the video so more people can see it. So today we're getting into some nitty-gritty in the philosophical realm. It's going to get a little bit murky. It's going to get really deep and complex, but this is really essential philosophical territory that we're going to get into here about the nature of order and chaos, creation and destruction, and where we fit into the universal laws and our own free will choices. So, as we often do here on the show, we're going to get into the definitions first. And in this section, actually, we'll kind of spend some time on these. There's a lot of definitions that we want to get into, but definitions can be a really powerful tool for unlocking new perspectives when normally the word you're looking up is going to contain another word that is hinting at a larger system. And so that's what I'll often do, is sort of follow that breadcrumb trail from another word that I pulled out of a definition that I thought was interesting, and then see how that other definition plays into the previous one and plays into that bigger picture. So again, what we're talking about today is order and chaos, primarily these massive, all-pervasive universal forces that are always playing out in some form or another, and seemingly one taking hold over the other in all kinds of different situations. So let's get into this. First off, looking at creation and destruction. So creation is defined very simply as to bring something into existence. So from the natural law perspective, understanding the principle of mentalism, using what you can conceive of mentally and then bringing that into reality. So destruction could be a form of creation if you want to look at it this way. You are bringing devastation into existence. It's whatever you're creating in reality, whether that's something good that benefits people or causes harm. But not all that is destructive is bad or harmful, and that's kind of a big element that we want to really unpack in this episode as well. But Brian, you care to comment on that?
Yeah, I think both, destruction and chaos, I think those are things that people hear them and they're kind of words that, they'll trigger people, almost like anarchy. We've talked about on the show that even when they describe anarchy, and anarchists will be used to this, the definition they use is that they'll try to describe it as a state of chaos. Well, that's built off of what? The assumption or the false belief that chaos is actually a negative thing. There's a presupposition in there. So we're going to be looking, why destruction and chaos are actually both very useful parts of nature and need to be understood and embraced, and we need to know how to work with them. And we'll get into some various examples of where these come play, but they're really kind of two sides of the same coin. Creation and destruction and order and chaos. Both are always at play in some form or another. So there's a lot in this episode to get into, but we definitely wanted to I've really been wanting to address the subject of kind of chaos and chaos magic, and these forces that people will kind of much like the idea of anarchy, people will have a misconception about, or things like that. So we definitely want to get into all the little points of, like, first off, what are these, and then how do they apply, how can we observe them in nature, and then obviously being pagans or animists, nature is what we are observing to learn about, because that's practical. It helps us actually interact with the world in a healthier way.
Very well said. And what's interesting about this is we have these sets of terms, these sort of polarities, order and chaos, creation and destruction. Well, these are different ideas. Order isn't the same as creation, but there is definitely a link between these. And this is what we're really kind of trying to look at, the sort of the bigger picture of the relationship between these terms and these dynamics. So moving towards the order and chaos, the dynamic of order and chaos, beginning with the definition of order. It's interesting that when I went to look this up, the first definition that it offered me was the law perspective, or the legality, or the statist perspective. And this is really ironic, because it's exposing itself that it's an imposter trying to stand in the place of true natural law, true law. So law, and they even try to, just as they want to interchange the words anarchy with chaos, as if they are the same word that mean one and the same, they do the same thing with law and order. They even made a TV show called Law and Order. It's just, law and order was restored. So as if to imply that without man's law and man's authority, chaos is just the absolute default state. I mean, that is such a perfect example of the gaslighting mentality that you have to accept in order to take on these worldviews and accept things like statism, for example. So to wrap this up, this definition up, it's described as a state in which the laws and rules regulating the public behavior of the members of a community are observed and authority is obeyed. So all the pieces are there, except that it's talking about man's law and not the inherent laws of creation, which do govern public behavior and is an actual true authority, because it cannot be risen above by a conscious being. It's something that's just set in place.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's with order, when we think about order things, that means we're taking something and we're organizing it. There's some kind of design or intelligence behind it, to where it's supposed to be working a certain way. It can be understood. Order is a very left brain, very masculine kind of concept, whereas chaos could very more easily, it would be associated with kind of like a feminine kind of a concept. But again, a system that is far into a very kind of unhealthy masculine energy, a dominator energy. Mm-hmm. Of course, they're going to view that chaos, that feminine energy, as something dangerous to itself, because obviously, it couldn't remain in its state of being if it integrated that. And that chaos, that feminine force, not only is it a force that is creative, but it's also destructive. We see that in a lot of female archetypes like Kali and things like that, with feminine archetypes, these goddesses of destruction. So that's definitely something to look at. And interesting to observe is that the state wants their total order and control. What they want, their left brain society, where everything is organized, everything's controlled, and it's controlled by who? It's controlled by them. So they absolutely feared that power of that feminine, that chaos. So it's then inherently demonized when it should be, embraced and used. And when you can learn to tap into that feminine energy and that chaos, that's something they can't control. They can't pin it down because they're so far disconnected from that true feminine energy that they can't wrap their minds around how it works. You know, they can't predict it. They can't analyze it. It's just it's just something that, you know, it's chaotic in its response.
Mhm. And there again, people believe that anarchy is synonymous with chaos, because chaos
Mhm.
really is kind of associated with disorder, but like the confusion and the potential for destruction that comes about with that. Chaos isn't just necessarily random. There's another example. Random and chaos are two separate words. There is a random aspect to chaos, but what makes chaos this very kind of frightening thing is because it brings about a potentially destructive energy with it. But again, in this context, we're looking at why, you know, these words aren't necessarily bad. Chaos, destruction, these bring change. They break up stagnation and till the earth for to be rife with new potential.
Mhm.
And so the next definition, you know, obviously being chaos, disorder and confusion, the potential for destruction. And that's where the fear comes in, is the fear of the unknown. What might happen? I don't
Mhm.
know. Something bad could happen. But if we look at, again, the laws of thermodynamics, even though these are very secular and exoteric laws, we know that there is a correspondence to every physical law. There is a, you know, a spiritual or metaphysical law as well. So you can see the mirror, you can see the reflection happening, where entropy is what is taking place in a isolated system. In other words, something that is cut off from nature becomes stagnant and begins to decompose. That is entropy. That is chaos. It's just that sort of force of nature that's trying to break things down and turn them back into like a more simple, but yet think about it, in its simple form, what does simplicity carry? Potential. Think about it. The more I talk about a thing, the less wonder there is about it. The more I'm sort of fleshing out the details of a thing, the less potential is there is for that thing to be something else that I haven't said, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah, you're solidifying it the more you speak about it in that example. There's definitely a huge misconception with people, how they specifically like look at chaos, you know, and I think it's that element of that the unknown, you know,
Mhm.
that like you were mentioning, that can really scare people, because especially people who are stuck in a very kind of a left brain society, like most here in the West are, not being able to know something or be in control of it. That's something that very much terrifies them, and I think that goes to speak that on a societal level, most people are so stuck into their program that they're stuck into what that R complex of their brain. They're stuck in their fight and flight mode all the time. They're in a survival mode of just trying to get by. So then you know, when you're in a state of survival, and then you're, you know, you're just wanting to try to figure things out, so you have that stability. So there comes the craving for order with that, but also the fear of that chaos of the unknown, because you know, things are, you already feel like you don't have stability, so you're in a state of like imbalance in that way. So you know, it makes you react that way, to where you fear chaos, when really, when you understand that it's just being able, you know, we're all partaking in both, like all the time. We all are creating order in some way and creating chaos in others. Uh,
Mhm.
but when you can start bringing, you know, conscious will into it, you know, and then putting out an effect in the universe in a chaotic way, that's something that, you know, in magic, you know, chaos magic, that's it can have an extremely powerful effect, and it can be, you know, very useful. But I think a lot of people might be afraid of that, because one, there's that assumption that chaos is, you know, negative. Two, you know, they might be afraid of karmic repercussions, or things of that nature. And I think that kind of goes the to speak to some of the monotheistic or the Abrahamic programming that is still, very, very common in society. Even with the idea of karma, like you'll hear a lot of people, even modern Christians, still talk about like, oh, I hope they like their karma comes to them. Well, that's looking at a pagan perspective through a Christian worldview. When you do that, you're going to misunderstand it. Karma is not and we're going to do an episode about this soon. So, subscribe and, hit that little notification bell. So whenever that comes up, you'll know. But karma is something that it's not the universe just judging you of, oh, you did this many wrongs, so you deserve this many lashes now. That's how the Abrahamic God works. Like if you do something wrong, he punishes you. That's not how the universe works. Karma, when you're understanding it from the pagan perspective, it's a self-imposed thing. So if you are feeling guilty about something that you did, in life, then you will choose to, in the next life, experience certain kinds of lessons in order to learn from those. It's not about punishment, it's about learning. But the key is it's self-imposed. Like in the Norse tradition, for example, if you don't die as a spiritual warrior, or you had things in your life that you didn't fully resolve or anything like that, you go to Helheim. Helheim is a place of reflection. It's where you're looking at things. So it's like you have this life that there's a kind of a reflection stage in between where the soul is looking at things and the lessons it's learning, and then it chooses to go on to its next part of the journey. So when you're looking at it from that perspective, there's nothing you should have to fear with karma, unless you are absolutely like knowingly harming people, like trying to and using chaos magic to try to harm people. Well, then that I could see the soul at some level would then want to choose to hold on to a karma in order to learn from that in the next life or something like that. Mm-hmm. But if you were doing it with the intention of trying to have a positive effect, or enhance consciousness, or bring down a control system or something like that, well then that's something that even if some of the effects were negative, and they played out, I don't think that's something like a soul would judge. And this is just my opinion. I don't think that's something a soul would want to judge itself for. If you were trying to do something from a right intention, and then just some things go wrong, then that's just something that happens sometimes. We can never fully see how all our actions will play out. We're all part of this very intricate web and this is the chaos element of nature here, that it's always at play, that there's this element of randomness, and you never know how your action, no matter what your intention is going to affect others, and then what they're going to do, and then what they're going to do, but yet they're all still kind of connected together. So all you have to be is responsible for like how your actions, and like where are you coming from, and what are your intentions. And it's again, there's not a God that's going to be punishing you. It's not the universe punishing you. It's from the pagan perspective. It's you are taking a look at yourself, at your own soul, and then choosing where you want to learn and grow from there. So there's no kind of punishment element to it. So once you get out of that, then chaos is something, chaos magic and things like that, then that can remove a lot of the fear or hangups that I think a lot of people will have with it when they first hear about it. They'll kind of like have a little bit of a cringy feeling or reaction to it. But and we all participate in it, whether we realize it or not.
And it's because people are reacting from their ego. The soul doesn't have an ego. So when you go to Helheim to reflect on your life, you aren't looking at yourself with an egotistical perspective. You're seeing yourself honestly and genuinely trying to learn the lessons. You're not trying to save face and get out of punishments and things like that. That's the mind of a human. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, and yeah, taking back to that definition regarding thermodynamics, it's all about systems. And what is nature but the ultimate system, where everything is connected? That's what a system is all these multiple components that all have some sort of part to play with each other. So when the apple is on the tree, it's connected to that system. It's getting nutrients, it's getting water, it's moving, it's changing, it's growing. But when it falls off, as soon as it's removed from that system, it falls on the ground and it begins to decompose. But then what? It's still actually part of that system, because now that rotten material becomes fertilizer for the soil that then gives way to new life. This is a perfect, a very beautiful analogy for how nature works, and how chaos is an essential part of nature. You know, if you removed chaos from nature, everything, literally everything, all life would cease to exist. So, you know, you would never want to remove that anyway. So the sooner you can have a very healthy relationship with what chaos actually is, the more empowered you're going to become. So as we continue through the definitions, which we're going to move through, you know, somewhat quickly, and then we're going to revisit all these terms and really start to kind of like break them down more in depth. So moving on to the next dynamic, we have evolution versus involution, which is, if you're unfamiliar with that term, it's the opposite force of evolution. It's the thing that's trying to devolve complexity. You know, that's what evolution is. You know, look at our brains being one of the most complex things that we know about in the universe, is a direct result of matter being part of a system and being refined to a level of such complexity that our brains and the neural network is more complicated than practically, you know, the galaxies in outer space and things. Like it's that advanced, and that's how this happens, through this process of moving through the interaction of dynamics of all the different things and how they're playing in that feedback loop. So evolution is defined as the process by which different kinds of living organisms are thought to have developed and diversified from earlier forms. But, and that's sort of like the evolutionary theory aspect, but the very basic definition is the gradual development of something, especially from a simple to a more complex form. So therein you have it perfectly stated. And involution is simply that which is trying to reverse that process. But again, that's what's going to default anytime an organism is removed from natural systems. It's going to start breaking down and reverting to chaos. And this is very much what is being done to our human species at large, is we're being further disconnected from nature and thought of it as something separate from ourselves. And the more we do, the more we continue to get sicker and sicker, and more, you know, mental illness and things like this are going to become more of a problem as well.
Right. The disconnect from nature is a linchpin, really, and essentially between evolution and involution. Like, in the sense that the more disconnected from nature, you know, you get, the more you're slowly going to devolve. You're not going to be able to take care of yourself. And look at most of our species. If most people were like just put out, even, you know, in nature, the vast majority of modern people would probably not make it. They're that disconnected. And this is one of the reasons why, you know, we talk about the difference between monotheistic and pagan mindsets on this show a lot, because that's that disconnect from nature. That's where that was originally introduced, was in that kind of Abrahamic thinking, and then it has continued to develop and then degrade people's mindset to the point that they're so disconnected from nature. We see your average person literally has like almost no thoughts of their own. They just regurgitate what the TV tells them, or what their preacher tells them, or what their politician tells them, or anything else. It's almost like they've lost that individual spark, because they're that disconnected. You know, and I wanted to point out as well, you know, one of the things we're talking about in this show here, you know, is magic. You know, and magic it really is being able to step into a state of being able to direct and use both chaos and order, you know, as creative forces, you know, which this was something, you know, we talked about it. You know, we're always creating our own magic whether we like it or not. So you might as well be good at it. We did an episode called "Owning Your Magic" that you can check that out, where we got into that. But I really think to step in to a place of being a successful magician, you have to understand both of these forces and how they're used, and that they really are kind of two sides of the same coin, that one paves the way for the other. When they go in either extreme, and they're counterbalances to each other, built into the universe, so it doesn't ever go too far in one direction.
Absolutely. If you're enjoying this video, give us a like real quick. So the next little dynamic we wanted to look at here is probability versus random. So random is defined as something made, done, happening, or chosen without method or conscious decision. Very key words, conscious decision. Proceeding, made, or occurring without definite aim, reason, or pattern. So what are, these words that it's using, patterns, reasons, what are these all pointing to? Natural law, the systems, the patterns, the reasons behind anything. What is the reason behind anything? Natural law. This happened, therefore this was the result. This was the consequence or outcome, and therefore, of course, you have to factor in conscious decision, that some things just happen, storms and things that are all just sort of a result of things happening out there, and then also things happen because of a direct choice to make something happen. And so these are all playing into this idea of what is predictable, what is probable. The more you learn about natural law, the more you can know about probabilities, based on your experience, direct experience with these laws. You can determine that if this happens, then this will probably be the result. And then when it doesn't, well, it really just comes down to the outcome was based on the variables. Just because that water makes plants grow doesn't mean that that's all you need to know. That is a natural law, but it is still a dynamic. Well, you can overwater it, you can underwater it. That's a variable. How much water is going to determine the growth of that plant, for example. So you have to learn the laws, but then you have to learn the variables that dictate. And this is what makes natural laws a dynamic system. So understanding dynamics is extremely important because it's an interplay. You can't it's not a one-sided thing that's a very black and white. Think of something like cooking. I mean, it can be applied to anything, but just take cooking, for example. The right amounts of heat, the right amounts of spices, moisture, things like that. These are all variables that can go into how good you are at cooking, which just think of even the idea of a skill. What is a skill? A skill is determined by how well a person can create a successful outcome. In other words, achieve what they went out to do, whether it was to cook a pie or build a house. Your skill determines your aptitude at doing that thing. How do you get that? By learning more about natural law. If you want to play guitar, you've got to learn music theory. Music theory is simply the natural law of music. I mean, this literally applies to anything. That's why it's universal. It's applicable in all cases.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's good to look at the kind of the play between the state of being like of random versus probable. You can kind of see, again, a masculine and feminine play here, and that's why the system, they very much want that probable thinking. They want to be able to predict what kind of what this person's going to do or what that person's going to, and they want to control everything. I mean, you can see what they're trying to roll out now. So that's where, they can get, if you go too far, into the masculine, then you see they at that point then become afraid of that random element. of that chaos, of that
Mm-hmm.
feminine element, because that's not predictable. That's not, they don't know what's probable. For example, like a great, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in detail later, but like with how social media works, you can see they make all these moves, and they are trying to work in probabilities. They're expecting that, oh, if we do this, then people will react this way to give us this outcome. But then if you are acting from that feminine in that state of random, if you're working within the chaos, they can't predict that. So then they get back thousands and thousands of different responses and reactions that they weren't predicting. Like they can't predict how one person is going to be able to take something they did, see how ridiculous it is, make a funny meme about it, and put that out there that tens of thousands of people see it and have an effect. Like that's a perfect example of chaos magic that we're all using all the time. So there's when the system is so far stuck into the masculine energy, the way to counterbalance that out, or a very good tool to use, is the feminine energy, the chaos magic. You tap into that random element because that can't be controlled, that can't be predicted, it can't be held down, and that's the thing they fear the most, because it's the exact polar opposite of what they're trying to achieve. So it's an extremely useful tool to be able to tap into, and it's, we can see how effective memes have been in shaping culture. Like they're literally part of worldwide culture now. Like there's something very magical about that, and a meme is definitely an example of chaos magic. But we'll get more into that a little bit later here in the episode.
Yeah, you really tapped into something, because the relationship between order and chaos, or predictable versus random, are very, very evident in the dynamic between natural law and free will, because the law doesn't change. The law is predictable. That's where probability comes in, is the more you understand those laws, the more you can predict outcomes. But no matter how much you learn, you're never going to fully eliminate that random. And that's what free will truly is. And that's why everything that's occurring in this war, ultimately, this spiritual warfare that's being conducted, it's a war on freedom, because all they live for is control. It's a control system. That's its singular purpose. So its direct enemy is freedom, the random. You see how all these pieces really fit into this very big. It's a key to unlock a lot of what's happening and understand why things are happening, is that they can't control freedom. Because they're the exact opposite of one another. So it makes sense that the more control that they want to achieve, the more they're going to have to eradicate freedom. That's why they go through such lengths to control your mind, because you're choosing it. You're choosing to act in line with their preferred behaviors. You're doing what they want, but make you think it was your idea. That's how mind control really works, because they want to remove your freedom. They can't take your freedom away. You understand? You're always free. You always have a choice. So what they can do is try to trick you into making them think that what they're choosing is best for them, when they've actually been led to believe that they should choose a certain thing, even though it's not in their best interest. It's in the best interest of the person trying to convince them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, yeah, and when you think about the feminine, that's also associated with care. That's that heart based intelligence,
Yes.
that we talked about in our episode with Mark Passio. That if you haven't seen that, check that out. But that it shows you that if you really want to understand freedom, like you have to have the care. Like free will and care go hand in hand. It's that element. It's that choice. Like you're saying, natural law. That's that immovable. Like it's inherent. It doesn't change. That is the true order. But the chaos, that element that's always also there, is free will. And that free will is directly, being a feminine, that's associated with care. So you see that you have to have a lot of care to really, especially in today's world, to want to stand up for people's choices, even if you don't agree with them. where it's the system of, order, whether that be a state system or a religious system. What have they always tried to do? They've tried to remove the free will, like remove your choices, that it has to be the strict way. You saw that definitely with early Christianity, that the idea of the ego or the self, that, you shouldn't live for yourself at all. It's all about living for God. And all these different things. It's all about removing the free will. In fact, still to this day, the Catholic Church, my my ex sister-in-law, she's a nun. She's still at the convent, not that far away. One of the things my son's mother was telling me, that her and her brother, they were sitting there whenever she was taking her vows, and one of the things they literally say is that you no longer have free will. And she said her and her brother looked at each other, and everybody's just clapping and just realizing it. And then they're like, well, did no one just hear that? Like, so that's why these Abrahamic, the monotheistic tradition, that was really a foundation that laid the way and paved the way for the modern statism in the system that we have. It's a Judeo-Christian system. And that's where you can see the order is so far gone. That's why you can see, within the state, they try to go after, people's care, or they try to play off of the care, within, the Christian religion. They really tried to eliminate the goddess, or eliminate the feminine energy. It's all this attack on the random element of the universe, of that chaos, of that destructive force that actually is the very, it's the very thing that can destroy them. That's why they fear it.
And let's just come out and say, I think that's exactly why they very deliberately subjugated women throughout history. And now, only just now, is this starting to kind of have that backlash that, we're looking at in this episode as well, about how things, the equation is always trying to balance itself. For every action, there's always an opposing and equal reaction. So the more you subjugate a thing, the more you try to dominate and quelch a thing, the more it's going to build up pressure, and then it eventually will explode and find that equilibrium. And I love that you were talking about the care too, because the feminine always must come first, is a sort of a metaphysical law, in that things begin internally and then externally. So first, the internal world is the feminine realm, so even within that, it all has to start with care. Care is the love of truth, essentially, which leads to courage, which is the masculine internal aspect, which then leads to action, which is the external masculine, expression of that. But again, it all starts with care. If a person has no love for truth, they're spiritually dead. And there's nothing they can do beyond that point until they've taken care of that within themselves.
It just makes so much sense why, a system that's all about control, they very much want to eliminate that ability for people to create chaos as they see it, because within that chaos, that random element, it's that creativity, it's that ability to create a reality outside of the one that they are wanting you to live in. Like I said, that's why the memes, forms of chaos magic like that are so powerful, because anytime they try to come in and try to form their own reality, you can send it right back at them with like a big fuck you, and laugh in their face, and then you have then altered the reality back. Like and right now we live in a time where our reality is very malleable. You could live as a total fucking slave right now if you want to, or you could be as free as you want and having a really good time observing what is going on, and the chance that we have to really kind of create the world that we actually want, if we just get out of the fear-based victimhood mentality and start learning how to use these universal forces in alignment with cosmic law. Then we start actually creating what we really want.
Right. And this struck me too as you were talking. What do they say when people do this? He took the law into his own hands. Well, wait a minute. No, so let's think about this. Who did it first? Did the government take the law into their own hands first and just take it upon themselves? And then suddenly, when somebody wants to actually take it back, it's not that they're taking the law into their own hands, it's that the government did it first and they're just trying to take it back. I say, power to you.
Yeah. Mhm.
So, so really that sums up the definition portion. And so now we're going to kind of revisit the topics with that foundation laid and really get into more of the rich essence of what we wanted to get into today. So again, bringing back to creation and destruction. This kind of goes into what I had just said about every action is going to have a positive and a negative effect to varying degrees. So you could take a very positive action, there's still going to be some negative aspects to that. Even if it's only 5% of the overall outcome was negative, every action is going to have a different ratio of order and chaos to it, or, creation and destruction, for example. But then that action is also going to take form in reality, and there's going to be a reaction as well. And usually the more good that is created, the more good will come back. This is the law of Gabo. And likewise, the more destruction, not in the general sense, but in a harmful sense, unnecessary, senseless destruction, there's going to be a natural backlash with that as well. And we can absolutely see this playing out in the Middle East. That's why, we talk about, well, there's terrorism is higher than ever. That's because, our foreign policy is more active than ever. If you can consider the relation between those two things, how would you feel if another country came and bombed your city and your children died and you were literally, your home was reduced to rubble and you had nothing left? What would you probably do with the rest of your life? I'm just saying. I'm not saying terrorism is a good thing. I'm just saying I see why it's happening. I understand.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and that's the thing, is these forces, as with anything in natural law, as with magic, anything in nature, they're neither inherently good or inherently bad. They're neutral, and it's how you use them. It's the free will and the consciousness that comes behind them and is directing them of how they actually get used. For an example, you know, um, destruction is actually a form of creation. We could see this with a few examples. So one would be like with a house, like you buy a property, that you're going to fix up, and there's an old house on it that's like just really ran down. It's not worth fixing or anything. So what do you first have to do? You have to destroy that old house. You have to demolish it out. But there's a conscious decision in order to do that, and then simultaneously, while you're destroying that house, you're also creating the open space for the new place to go.
Mm-hmm.
So they're both always at play. Like if you're destroying something, you're opening up the space for the creation of something else. That's
Yes.
and you can see this in nature, that as one season ends, it gives way to another. As one life ends, it gives way to another. There's always this give and take, and these are the forces that are at play with a lot of this.
Right, and you can see that they are two separate forces in a way. You can see that they have different effects, they have different, characteristics, but yet when looking at the larger system, you can see that there is actually no difference. Like you just said yourself, every time you destroy something, you're creating something. Every time you create something, you're destroying something. If you want to build a beautiful piano, you have to destroy some trees to create the wood and all the materials to create that thing. If you want to destroy the system, right, take down the system, you have to create more freedom, or that will be a natural byproduct of destroying the system, is create more freedom. Or you can create more freedom in order to destroy the system. You see how that quote about, rather than fighting a thing, just create a new thing that makes the other thing more obsolete. Very smart, form of magic there. And then sharing valuable truths, such as what we're trying to do with this channel, creating awareness and knowledge. But guess what? We're destroying illusions, we're destroying ignorance. So there's always that sort of two-edged sword to everything, and everything is giving way to the new. And that's important to remember, is like as change is inevitable, And so rather than fighting it, the only sane thing to do is first accept it and then embrace it and then learn to actually channel it. Then you're gonna have to develop a healthy relationship with destruction, chaos, fear, all those things. They just go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we can see it reminds me of, the phrase that I always like to say that, everything is the same in a different way. We can see, we're all part of the all, and it's playing out in lots of different ways. And these different forces all have their place in nature, they're inherent in nature, and both play an extremely important part. And, they're similar, but they're also different. So, that's, something about that phrase. I've always found so much truth in that little simple saying. Definitely at play here.
Absolutely. So the next little section we wanted to look at is revisiting, order and chaos, but really looking at this with a lot of care and nuance to it, because that sort of bull in a china shop, black and white thinking is something that we're actively trying to stay away from and encourage people to use caution with. So when thinking about order and chaos in the relationship to consciousness and ignorance, not necessarily saying that all chaos is caused by ignorance or that chaos is necessarily a bad thing. What I'm trying to say is there is a definite relationship between consciousness and ignorance and order and chaos, in that ignorance has that element of dangerousness to it, which we talked about in the beginning. So it's the possibility of destruction. It's not guaranteed. People say ignorance is bliss. I say it's temporary bliss followed by inevitable suffering, because it's only a matter of time. You're looking at this random aspect, you're rolling the dice with your ignorance. The longer you continue on in a state of ignorance, the more you're putting yourself and everyone else in danger. And so in light of everything else, that ignorance and the subsequent chaos is paving the way for more consciousness. That danger, that chaos is a state that human beings don't want to, is not sustainable, right? We want homeostasis. We want to find that balance. And so just as ignorance will end when we've had enough suffering, that chaos is bringing about that suffering that's trying to move you in the direction of waking the hell up and seeing what you're doing to yourself and other people. So what I'm really trying to say is the more intention and care you are wielding your consciousness, the more you can balance order and chaos for the betterment of everyone, and being just a less destructive person. And again, destruction has its place, but there's a difference between necessary destruction or chaos and senseless, needless. Same as suffering, really, right? Suffering when you're working out in the gym is not only unavoidable, it's healthy for you, versus continuing to be an alcoholic and poison your liver. That's just senseless. It's not actually helping you, it's destroying you. So I hope that helps create a little bit more clarity when we're talking about these terms, is we're not saying it's all necessarily bad or good. There's a lot of nuance to it.
Yeah, exactly. As I was saying earlier, like as with anything in nature, they're neutral. So for example, if you were bringing your conscious awareness into a form of magic, like you're using a meme, which a meme is essentially a sigil, and you're bringing that in there in order to you have a certain effect, a certain order that you want to have out of that, but at the same time, there is a chaos to it. You don't know who's going to react to that meme and how they're going to react to it, how it's going to make them feel, but yet all of that psychic energy is still adding to the charge of that. So if you're making a lot of really really dang memes, becoming a meme lord, and they're doing well, it's because all that psychic energy that's going around, that's adding to your charge, it's adding to your charisma. Now, a lot of people could, think of that is like, you're trying to steal other people's energy, but it's not that. It's the random, it's that random element in the universe. Like, we are, everything you do in life is an energy exchange of some sort of the other. Like everything in the universe is that energy, and it's all moving around. It's always exchanging, and it's in a constant state of change. So that's the thing with chaos magic. Like, you have the intention, and then you put it out there, and then it's going to collect whatever charge it collects, and have whatever effect it has. And that, again, there's an element of danger to it, but that's also, there's an element of danger to a lot of things. If you go too far into control and you don't have the ability to step into chaos, well, there's a danger in that, obviously, and that's what leads to authoritarian systems and things. So, it really all comes down to your awareness, especially with using chaos. If you are being ignorant and then just creating chaos unconsciously by default because of your ignorance, that is very, very different state of being than being consciously out there trying to create chaos. Like, so for example, like in our recent episode we did about modern paganism, we talked about being a consciousness insurgent, of being able to kind of use that Loki energy or the trickster energy to poke at the system and like destroy the system. That's definitely, we want to create a form of chaos within that. We want that system to eat itself alive. And we just want to assist along with that process. So, that's an example I'm bringing to. So again, with it's a neutral force, and what determines its outcome is the consciousness and the will and the awareness of the person, wielding that force.
Right. And balance really is the name of the game here. So in order to balance something, you're not trying to eradicate one side or the other. You're trying to understand that when you find that equilibrium, everything else sort of just plays out and has a more peaceful way of transpiring and playing out. And so in context to order and chaos, just think about it. Well, you're naturally wired to think order's good, chaos is bad, but too much order is not a good thing. Think of like gardening, for example. To let things grow, there's sort of that live and let live. There's sort of that let them, leaving things alone and just letting nature do its thing. And there's that chaotic sort of random element. Weeds are going to pop up, and things or trees are going to get too big, or grow into your fence and things. You're trying to manage that chaos. You're trying to pull the weeds as they come and things like that. But too much of that is going to kill the ecosystem. We've talked a lot about this in context of, say, like permaculture and things like that. Having that diversity is sort of allowing the chaos to go a little bit more free and wild. I mean, even the word wild, what does that mean? It has this sort of natural, a fierce, wild, it just means untamed, right? These words are all really tapping into the essence of this, of free and wild versus this rigid, strict, control mindset that can really go overboard. So look at a city. Well, that there's no life there. Even the trees, they're like sectioned in these concrete holes, and everything's grids. It's very masculine and boxy and everything like that. So that's a good example of that.
Well, I think I was thinking about astrology in the context to order and chaos, and it really shows you that nature has a balance of both of these things at the same time. That many times there's order within what we perceive as chaos. So for example, as a person who, if you're just looking up at the stars and you see them moving and changing their positions, it may appear very random until you can actually observe enough information to see that there's actually a very distinct order and method to the madness, so to speak. So I think that's something we can see in nature over and over again. There's always kind of order and chaos, like in a river. It has its own like little course and path. There's an order to it. But if a storm happens, that river might flood. It might go a little bit over its normal course, or it becomes very chaotic in the way that it's moving through, and everything gets kind of shaken up.
Those are
And then
variables.
right, yeah, they're just all the different variables that happen. So both of these are always at play. So being afraid of one, you're going to end up putting yourself into a state of imbalance, and right, and because you're fighting nature, like especially on the show, we're speaking from the pagan or the animist perspective. So if you want to learn from something, like observe nature, and these are both forces that we can see at play in nature all the time.
Mm-hmm. Right. The trick is to learn to work with nature. It's not about commanding or dominating nature. That's a very foolish, silly man, mentality. The pagan mindset is not to dominate nature. It's to harness and sort of work with and direct and channel and things like that. You're just a humble messenger. You're directing. You're not commanding anything. And I wanted to touch on the idea of alchemy as well, because in this context, I mean, this is really hitting on the major components for, chaos carries a massive charge with it. That's just a fact, and so there you have it. That is raw power, untapped raw power. And what is power but really the capacity or the ability to direct or influence, this is the definition, to direct or influence the behavior of others or the course of events to bring about a specific outcome. So again, it's all right there for you. The ability, which is, again, it's pure potential. It hasn't played out yet. Power itself is just infinite potential that can be directed and brought about and used to bring about a specific outcome, rather through your own behaviors or playing out a course of events that lead to that. So really, if you think about it, power itself isn't doing anything until it's actually used. Even when people say, knowledge is power, only if you're using it. The power itself is just the pure potential. And so, you can kind of think about that chaos as being another well of pure untapped charge or power or potential for you. And so you're by fearing it or discounting it or saying it's evil or whatever, you're just cutting yourself off from that abundance of power.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Especially if you're viewing this as like an evil force, like if you only see chaos and like this black and white thing and it's evil and you totally shut yourself off from it, or you're afraid of, doing something that's immoral somehow, or something that's, that's Abrahamic programming. Pagans, said we observe nature. And when you see this, these are forces you can use. Like if you were wanting to, like I said, create anything, even if you're wanting to like create a garden or something, you first may have to like, destroy some of the stuff, get some of the other stuff out of the way. There might be like some old bramble bushes or something over there that, like those aren't what you're wanting there. So you use destruction, a little bit of chaos to clean the slate and then create space for something new to then come out of that. And that's what, we're seeing in our world right now. Like it's very much going through this state of chaos. And that's why, it's such an excellent time for not only observing and learning, but for our practice of magic, like these right now and, the years to come here, reality is going to be very malleable to where we have, within this chaos, there's all this potential that we can pull out of it if we let it. And that's the thing is potential is neutral as well. There's potential for the control system to get even even crazier for people to go along with it blindly and to just do exactly what they're told. There's also the potential for people to start becoming more aware and start embracing chaos and doing what they can to bring down that control system, to balance that back out with that chaos and create the reality that we want. But it's absolutely a tool that, especially those of us within the community or those of us in the world that are aware and would like to see others more aware and more free. This is something and a force that we should not be turning our backs to or being afraid of, because that's going to keep us disempowered. It's going to keep us farther away from the solution that we say we want.
Exactly. And calling them tools, I think, is really good, because I think this is very key to the pagan mindset of seeing everything as a tool. And part of just becoming more mature and understanding the way things work is understanding that there's no such thing as a bad or a good tool. They're just a useful tool or a not useful tool. Any tool is going to be useful, if it's better than the one you're using, but at a certain point, if you are continuing to evolve, then if your tools aren't evolving with you, then continuing to use the same tools is actually going to end up holding you back in the long run, much as if I was still trying to use a horse and carriage for everything, or a bow and arrow in a gunfight or something like that.
Well, I like that you brought that up, because I mean, if there's one thing I learned, it's like as a tradesman, it's having the right tool for the job that you're trying to achieve, the outcome you're trying to achieve is essential. Like if you're trying to do a job with the wrong tools or minimal tools, it can take you a long time. Whereas the right tool, you get it done a lot quicker. It looks a lot better, all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Understanding all these different forces as tools, and then knowing when, having the discernment, to understand nuance and to know when to use which one and why, that's where you really step into a place of empowerment and can actually start using these to create the kind of world that you want, and destroy the kind of world that you don't.
Very well said. And in the context of tools, you thinking of order and chaos as tools in and of themselves, that you're going to use the right tool for the right job. Sometimes a little bit of chaos is called for, where that you can feel it in the air. There's like an atmosphere, an energy to it that that you're going to tap into when you post something kind of controversial. For example, a great example of chaos magic. It doesn't even have to be a meme. It could be a few words that make people lose their shit, and you're just sitting there watching the dumpster fire play out, and like, because that you're not doing it to hurt people. You're not doing it just to upset people. You're doing it to upset people's illusions. You're doing it to make them question and look at themselves and sit, and maybe possibly in the random, off chance they might say, why am I reacting this way? What a great what a great opportunity to observe myself and grow from it. Most people don't take the opportunity, but I like to give them plenty of chances if I can.
Yeah.
But looking at these, a few other examples of tools in this context of something that can be viewed as chaotic but still very useful. So, like controlled burns, burning down certain areas of forest or vegetation or something is done for a good reason. Conservationists and people, do things like this to try to help balance out an ecosystem. It seems harmful, but yet when you understand that it's about the outcome, it's about how things actually play out and the new state that is created through that process. Even guns, very chaotic. They can backfire. They're loud. They're very dangerous potentially. See, in the hands of a responsible person, guns aren't dangerous to anything that they don't want it to be dangerous towards. That's but it's looking at the intention of the person wielding that tool, whether it's a gun or a meme, or gardening or landscaping, whatever you want to say, or say something like mushrooms. Brian, you mentioned mushrooms is a great example.
Yeah, mushrooms are definitely a good example of, I think, something that definitely has both that destructive and that creative element to it. So with mushrooms, there's something I see that, they definitely kind of embody both the destructive and the creative force. We can see that, in nature, they will break down different substances. They're the decomposers. So they kind of have this destructive element to them that, and they're just kind of they're feeding kind of very randomly. There's not necessarily a thought pattern behind it or anything. So there's that chaotic element to it. But at the same time, they then out of that create, fruiting bodies. They create mushrooms and things, that there's something that's very, very viable, very useful in many different ways, whether that be for like food or medicine.
Even when you take it into your body, say like psychedelic mushrooms, your guts are all retching and you're kind of, sweating, and you feel a little uneasy as everything is setting in. It's that sort of that chaos that's churning up all that junk in the depths of your soul that's getting ready for you to actually deal with and, and process through on your journey.
Mm-hmm. One, another example, like the controlled burns, it made me think of like demolishing a building. Like they're blowing up a building. There's an element of control to it. Like there's a certain building they're taking down, for whatever reason, because it's old, it needs demolished.
And
someone else bought the property.
All in, so it doesn't like
right.
destroy.
So there's a certain order to it. Yeah, but there's also that element of destruction. It's an explosion, like it's a very chaotic event, But we can see like storms. Storms would be another thing in nature that we can observe, that they appear to be this very chaotic thing. And they do have the potential for a lot of destruction, like especially the storms that we get, here in the Midwest. We get a lot of like tornadoes and things. A lot of them can wipe out entire towns, but not every storm is that destructive. A lot of storms come through. They're very chaotic. Like you don't know like when the lightning's going to strike or where the thunder's going to strike or how much rain is going to, it's a very chaotic element to it, but it's also very nourishing. It's bringing the rain and the things that, all the crops need and all the plants need to grow, and, the animals and that we need to survive. Yeah. So, it's this chaos that like, paves the way or brings, new growth, new life. So it's as much as it is a destructive force, it's also a creative force as well. It has this, this duality as well as control. It has a dualistic aspect to it, that it's a constructive force. It can be very creative, but it can also destroy things. Too much control destroys freedom. It destroys the random beauty. It destroys, all the other feminine aspects of life. So, you have to, with everything, again, they're neutral. It's all how you are utilizing them.
Yeah, man. I mean, even that just struck me. Even the very chaos of nature is what gives it a lot of its beauty. A storm is so majestic and awe-inspiring because it can fuck you up, or just looking out across an expanse of trees and clouds and mountains and all these things. There's sort of that chaotic element to it of like everything is sort of just in this temporary state. Right, the mountain isn't even what it is. It just happens to be eroded in that exact way, and part of it's been blown away into oblivion, and trees are springing up wherever they want, and you can kind of look at that random chaotic element as a lot of the beauty of nature itself. Very, very interesting to look at. And
I like that you brought that up, because it reminds me of that time, just last year where I was coming back from California and I got caught in that tornado out on the I-70. It's like, it's definitely real chaotic, because I was, and nerve wracking, but at the same time, it was kind of like a really beautiful experience at the same time. So, that there's definitely, it's, like these are definitely things that can be observed, but I do like that point that a lot of the very chaotic things in nature are also extremely beautiful to observe and to witness.
Come to think of it, I mean, that plays beautifully into another recent episode that we did about death. Isn't it true that the chaos of death, the sort of you never know when or how you're going to die, it's sort of that unknown factor that is kind of scary about death, but also, again, gives so much beauty and meaning to life, because you never know when your time is going to come. So it makes you want to live more fully in the moment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you guys haven't checked out that episode, go check that one out as well.
Yeah, I can't stress enough to the viewers, if you've been following us a little while, really go back and watch our old stuff. We've covered a lot of different material, and covered what we feel is the very foundational components of our worldview. And if you're missing big pieces of that, you might hear us mention a certain concept that we've done a whole entire episode on. And so going back through our material and getting that back information will really help, I think, give a lot of context to a lot of the things that we touch on in more recent episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So again, really, really driving home the importance of balance in all of this, in all things really, but specifically this, and how if you're not balancing something out of fear, that you're disempowering yourself. So a fear of chaos is a fear of your own power, hands down. One's own power, your freedom, and your own potential, because all of those things come in hand in hand. If you're not free, you can't maximize your own potential, because your potential is being squelched by you having less choices that you can make. And this all really comes back to the mono mind virus that we talk a lot about. And ironically, Yahweh really is a symbol of chaos, but not even in the good way. It presents itself as a good way. It destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah because they were all wicked, evil, sinners and all this kind of thing. But really though, when he's killing firstborns and bringing plagues and things like this, this is not a good kind of chaos. So, but isn't it funny that with that chaos of Yahweh commands the fear of God that they literally are proud of having as some sort of twisted virtue, the fear of God. And that's where that really comes from, is because God represents the not good chaos. You should be afraid of that.
Don't you know it's all allegorical plagues, Logan? Now, we'll actually be addressing that in future series that we're going to be getting into, where we're really going to delve into the Abrahamic mindset and its foundations, both from the exoteric perspective as well as the esoteric perspectives, and why all of them are fundamentally disempowering. But again, subscribe and stay tuned to see whenever we come out with those. But like I said, these are things inherent in nature, and we're always using them all the time, whether we're aware of it or not. Like, we all use chaos magic when we're sharing memes on the internet. And when you think about that, what does it mean? We've talked about this before. It's a sigil. A sigil is something that you're taking a complex idea and reducing it down to a very simple form. So it's packed with a charge, and then you're just releasing it out there to see what happens. So, if there's, a meme, a sigil, it's a wonderful example of complicated simplicity that I talk about. You're taking the complexity, reducing it down to simplicity, and then, with intention and will, you then put that out there with a chaotic element, a random element. And, you don't know what kind of effect that's going to have. That's the thing, is you can't control everything. There's always a free will element to it. So by learning to not be afraid of that and letting go of trying to control and embracing that chaos, you can actually, it's a very useful way to be able to build up your charge, to be able to build up your charisma. Not tapping into that skill, or doing it from a place of ignorance where you're not even aware of what a powerful kind of act that you have there, then you're wasting potential. Because think about what is all that charge out there. We talk about it's potential. If you want to get places in life, or imagine, use the scenario of you want a car, right? That car has to be able to have gas. And if you have a certain destination, it's very useful. Imagine if as you go along, other people are also adding fuel to your vehicle. So you're not having to pay for that fuel yourself. You're still getting to your destination, but you're saving yourself a lot of trouble. That's essentially what you're doing with chaos magic. You're setting a destination. You're allowing the free psychic energy that's out there in the world, regardless. It always exists. It's always going somewhere. But you're just allowing it to tap onto and help, you get to where you need to go.
Right. It's like building one of those water wheels in a river. The river's already there. It's a source of power. All you're doing is tapping into that and learning to like harness that energy and direct it for a benefit. And there's, it's really as simple as that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So this next one, really, really important in my opinion, because of the current day and age that we're in. This very pacified, lefty snowflake era that we're in, however you wanted to label it or describe it, you know what I'm trying to say. This softened state of human beings, whether male or female, doesn't matter. It's this sort of demonization of that sort of patriarchal energy, if you want. Granted, without getting too off topic, there's some truth to that. I was just talking earlier about how cities are very patriarchal, like grids and cubicles, and city streets and jail cells are all grid, things like that. But what I'm saying is this sentiment that we shouldn't have to work for everything, right? This kind of commie idea that we'll just share and give, and then we won't have to work anymore. Like nothing will ever be hard again. It's just a very childish and naive mentality. This like world peace and everything's just going to be hunky dory. This is a great example of how I'm of course I want to see unnecessary suffering ending, wars and governments and genocides and police brutality and things like that. That's to distinguish unnecessary chaos. It's useless. It's senseless. But chaos is the driving force of consciousness towards advancing evolution. It's that Saturnian, Rahu energy that is putting the pressure down and squishing you and forcing you to harden yourself and push back and rise up and overcome. The apophatic teachers that show you, okay, there's a thickness in the air right now. You got to do something different. Obviously, this pressure is getting heavy. It's unsustainable. What are you going to do about it? Figure it out. Find the causal factors via natural law and shape reality differently to a better outcome. That's it. Diamonds are created under pressure. It's that magnificence that is achieved through the evolutionary process of increasing complexity, like fractals, everything branching off and becoming more complicated, while still being the simple thing that it is, like you say, complicated simplicity.
Yeah. Well, and it's very interesting to me that Saturn is also associated with cosmic law, with karma. It's that natural law, that pressure, and sometimes in natural law, that apophatic process is the best teacher. Like sometimes you need to burn your fucking hand to realize this. I'm not going to do that again, and we all do it, but those are the times that, hopefully if we have a little bit of intelligence, we don't keep putting our hand on the stove. Some of us might like to, but, it's just the key is to recognize that, oh, whatever I did didn't work. There was a negative reaction to that, or a negative consequence of that. So that pressure is very essential for us in order to actually evolve, in order to actually gain more awareness. And I think, man, this is striking me because you were mentioning, that kind of leftist ideology of where everything should be given to you. They don't want to have that challenge. They want this utopian society. And one, it's a disconnect from nature. What did we say earlier? The more you get disconnected from nature, the involution starts happening. You start to de-evolve.
Right.
And then now, what do we see? What that has happened with our left? They have literally devolved into just mental illness. They're mad. I think I saw an image of, like a bunch of women like screaming at Trump through their vaginas. It's, like they have literally like lost their fucking shit. Like, and they, it's because of this disconnect from nature, this not wanting to have this pressure of having to work for things, of having to, learn through this apophatic process. They just want everything kind of given to them. So I think that's definitely very interesting to see how absolutely essential that pressure is for us to evolve, because without it, we would actually just devolve into these just, little privileged creatures that just, they literally have no thoughts of their own. They just do whatever the media tells them.
And it's really, you could just call it domestication, because think about it. If domestication is the process of disempowering a species of organisms to the point that without their masters, they would literally die. So a domesticated animal can't survive in the wild. That can happen to human beings too. The masters being the ruling class, or the control system, whatever you want to call it. The more domesticated and disempowered, weak, ignorant, scared little pukes that we become, the more we're going to be begging for more control system, more daddy, more, police and laws and everything to keep us all safe, because, nature and the world and the what if, right? It's the chaos, the what if, the freedom, people choosing what they want and creating what they want. Oh, the horror, that is what you get. And that's no existence at all to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, absolutely.
Before that happens.
Right. And we see that, with the idea of the safe space or the safe bubble with the social distancing. They've been saying that for years. It's building it up. It's been, programming people to accept this social distancing. Everybody needs to have their safe space. It's all this, they're afraid of the element of chaos of like, I might get sick. Yeah, you fucking might. That's life. It's been the same on this planet for a long fucking time. And it's not going to change. Again, the only reason they're what they're doing now is working with a lot of the people is because of their disconnect from nature. Like, they don't recognize how nature works, like their own immune systems work. They're afraid of death because of like Abrahamic programming, which we talked about in our death episode, and they get into such a disconnected state that they're now devolving to a state of domestication that they are begging for their masters to, keep them safe from whatever scary thing it is that's out there. Even though it's something that naturally occurs in nature. Sickness is something that is normal.
Right, and this comes right back to when we were talking about anarchy earlier. The only reason that people believe that anarchy is synonymous with chaos is because they believe that other people will choose senseless destruction with their freedom. Because that's the chaos that they perceive, is people being able to choose whatever they want. And that's why, if you're not willing to defend freedom, to restore peace, that's another form of chaos magic right there. It's when there's a shooter, you kill that motherfucker. You take them down before they can hurt other people. That's chaos magic, because you're ending that life, you're creating that chaos to restore order. So, that's why, like, you have to choose between safe slavery or dangerous freedom, because you can't have freedom and safety at the same time. You have to be willing to not be afraid of the unknown. There's no other way around it. You have to be willing to just accept that some bad things might happen, but guess what? The more we turn to authority and control to solve our problems, the more we are guaranteeing destruction and chaos and pain and suffering.
Right, and not the positive kind.
Yeah.
It definitely, you see that That's interesting, this connection between free will and chaos. And that, status, like people that are afraid or they're wanting these authoritarian figures, that's what they're ultimately afraid of, is people's free will, because they have they've projected their own fear of what they think people might do out onto, in their entire worldview of, oh, it's just going to be this horrible destruction, people are going to be robbing other people, or committing all these violent acts, and they're afraid of that potential. And then because of these things that are all in their mind, like they don't actually have a proof for that, they then build their worldview off of that, and then end up going so far into the imbalanced masculine that they advocate for a control system. But it really all comes down to what they're essentially afraid of is free will, because they don't even trust themselves. So then they project that mistrust of their own self out onto the rest of the world.
Right. An empowered mind doesn't ask, what if somebody else, an empowered mind doesn't worry about what other people might do. They're only worried about, what are you going to do to stop it? Because if they're not causing harm to you or someone else, you shouldn't really give a fuck what they're doing. It doesn't concern you. When they start encroaching on people's boundaries, that's when you should be ready for action. It's guaranteed. People aren't always going to not respect boundaries in some form or another. So just expecting that, well, if we had anarchy, everybody would just, yeah, maybe. But the point isn't just to do away with the control system and just let everything run amok. That has to be replaced with extreme sovereignty and a willingness to defend rights. That's it.
Absolutely. So what, I think a way to kind of summarize, or what we can get out of a lot of this is that, cosmic law doesn't destroy you, but it gives you the freedom to destroy yourself. You can see that chaotic element in there, that's a very useful part of nature, because when you do have people like Bill Gates or these others, in the control system in the deep state, that they're trying to do whatever, they're violating natural law, and they have the free will to do that, but it's always going to come, and it's always going to come back, and they'll end up destroying themselves, and that's what we see happening now. We see the deep state running because they're afraid they're going to get fucking lynched. I mean, look at those scumbag order followers up in Minneapolis that just killed that poor man. They very sadistically executed him, it was fucking murder, and they're plain and simple. And now you see everybody rioting up there, and they're getting backlash. Like, now people are sharing those people's addresses now, so people are standing outside their house. I saw an article, the cop can't even get food delivered to his house right now, because as soon as the delivery guy shows up, they tell him who he is, and the delivery person will say, fuck that, I'm not going to bring him food, and turn around and leave. That's what happens. These psychopaths, they don't understand natural law. They think they can control everything, and then they overplay their fucking hand. And then that feminine force, that chaos, that care of people who have enough care for humanity to say that, oh, you shouldn't stand on a man or kneel on a man, and why he's begging to not fucking die, and then you execute him. That care will create that chaos, that backlash that's going to be there to counterbalance that system out. These people, they don't understand it, and that's why they're ultimately going to destroy themselves. And we have to just watch them do it. Let them do all of it. You observe it, make memes about it, and send it right back at them, and just let them fucking destroy themselves. And you just help give it a little bit of assistance along the way.
Yeah, it's like the snowball that's already rolling, and all you did was just kind of give it another little push as it came by.
Yep.
You're just like, oh, go. But I mean, yeah, we can't say that we don't like how things are if we aren't willing to change. We're simply getting what we're giving. That is how reality works. Behavior out, consequences back. 100%. There's no, and that's why, looking at the predictable versus the random, you hear people say a lot, the only constant is change. I disagree. That's implying that change is the only natural law and that everything else is just completely random. No, there are many, 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 many laws that are discoverable that do not change. The variables change, but the laws themselves have always been, they always will be, just they're waiting for you to discover them through action and reaction. So change is a natural law, but there are many, many other ones that should be looked at. And so I get a little bit annoyed when people say, the only constant is change. It's kind of a self-defeating statement, in my opinion. But again, learning the natural laws, like, okay, for knowledge to be useful, truth has to be consistent, right? If something's true today but not true tomorrow, life would be chaos. Why? Because it's unpredictable, it's random, it's madness, right? So truth has to be consistent. That's how technology works, right? The laws of physics that are making your cell phone work today will still be making it work tomorrow. And your cell phone doesn't break because one of those laws changed. It's one of those variables changed, right? Something got old or too hot or something, a variable, a temperature, something like that. But free will is always open to change because, like even we've talked about in the political system, you might think that you're choosing to vote for somebody, but as soon as they do something you don't agree with, well, then they're not your representative anymore. Well, were they ever? If they could just do whatever they wanted and you can do whatever you wanted, you can't vote for a representative because you always have your free will and they always have theirs. And either, they do something you agree with or they don't.
Yeah. So yeah, again, we can see all these, different dynamics and forces of observable nature. And the key is to understand them and then have that discernment of knowing when to use them. But, that's going to wrap this episode up. So again, if you enjoyed the content, give us a like, subscribe, and hit that little bell to stay notified whenever we do that. If you're interested in any of the services and things that we offer, if you want to help support us, you can go to thewizardfactory.com and check that out of, some of the different things we offer, from, the arts and gnosis to other packages and things that we have available. Be sure to check us out on, the other podcasts like Spotify and iTunes. We've recently got on there as well. So if you don't have time to get on here, if it's easier for you to listen at work while you're driving, we're on there as well. So check us out. That's going to wrap up this episode. So thank you for listening. And until next week, be empowered, be inspired, and be encouraged.